Now, if I was to ask you to name one live-action animated movie, such as Roger Rabbit, I'm betting the first thing that comes to your mind would actually be Roger Rabbit. And I must admit, I often think of this movie as being the very first live-action animation of its kind. Even though we had plenty of other live-action animation long before Roger Rabbit ever came out, I still think of this as being the one that truly broke the mould. And as a kid, I thought Roger Rabbit was so much fun, a zany adventure movie where humans and toons collide. And it is, but for a Disney movie, for the time it was released, it's also quite a dark movie. It's a film noir type gumshoe flick that deals with murder, sex and alcohol, and even a baby smoking a cigar. So yeah, there's actually quite a lot of adult themes in this movie, which was made for kids and sold all sorts of merchandise including toys, books and lunchboxes, to name just a few. Now, in the movie, Eddie Valiant, played by Bob Hoskins, is trying to get Roger Rabbit off the hook for murder because he's been framed. But in the book, Eddie Valiant is trying to solve Roger Rabbit's murder with the help of Roger Rabbit. Let me explain. In the plot of the book, toons can create doppels of themselves, what are sentient and have all the same emotions that they have. And they can send them out to do like stunts that they don't want to do. And after an amount of time, these doppels disintegrate, they disappear. Now, in the story, Roger Rabbit created one of these doppels and he sent him on an errand, and whilst the doppel was gone, Roger Rabbit actually got shot and murdered. And so the doppel hires Eddie Valiant to solve the murder. There's a little bit more to it than that. I don't want to ruin it. I want you to go and read the book. The book is absolutely amazing. Now, most of the characters, including Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit, Eddie Valiant and Baby Herman, were all transported to the big screen quite well. Even though there were little tweaks here and there, they were more or less the same characters as you had in the book, more or less. But there were some characters such as Eddie the Cab and Judge Doom who didn't appear in the book, and they were created especially for the movie. Another difference in the book is that Roger is a brown rabbit, but in the movie they changed Roger to a white rabbit so that he could be animated easier and so that he pops when he's on screen. Another detail from the book that did not make it into the movie is that the toons can actually manifest speech balloons in the book when they talk, and they fall to the floor and eventually fade away after a while. And I can understand why they did not bring this element to the big screen, because it's not really needed in a movie adaptation, and it would have just proved too difficult and probably very messy, showing all these speech bubbles showing up all over the screen. One thing that did interest me is when the movie actually did come out, the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit was kind of retconned, and the second book, Who Plugged Roger Rabbit, kept more in line with the movies, even going as far as having Jessica Rabbit explain that she had dreamed the entire first book on one chapter. By doing this, Gary could continue his story, which was loosely based on the movies with this already established relationship between the characters. The movie was directed by Robert Zemeckis, who was given the job after directing Romancing the Stone and a little movie you may have heard of.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
The voice of Roger Rabbit was performed by actor Charles Fleischer, who also acted out the scenes on set in a full Roger Rabbit outfit to really get in the character and the mood of things. And he was not the only one. Other toon actors also spoke their lines behind the camera, although they did not dress as their cartoon counterparts. And to give the real life actors on camera a better idea of where the cartoon characters would be once they were drawn in, rubber props were used in the scene to rehearse. This gave the actors a guide of where the toon's eye line would be and how to physically interact with a character that simply was not there. And once the rubber props were removed, the scene was shot again, but this time for real. And I've got to say, whilst watching the special features on this Blu-ray, massive props to Bob Hoskins, who really went all out in performing his own stunts for this movie. When you're watching the movie, you kind of take it all for granted, and you don't really appreciate how much work must have actually gone into it, which was a lot. There's actually a lot more to this performance than initially meets the eye. You see, Bob Hoskins actually makes you believe that he is seeing the toon right in front of him with his own two eyes, with his mannerisms and his range of emotions, the way he plays the scene. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's serious, and sometimes it's dramatic. And Bob Hoskins actually did say in multiple interviews that when he had the rubber prop in front of him, he had something to focus on, but once that prop was taken away, your eyes automatically focus to what is beyond, and you've got to kind of train your eyes to see this entity that isn't there. And he did say in some interviews that it was actually sending him quite loony, no pun intended.
Having to hallucinate for sort of 8 months, I lost control of it. I was, and I was trying to hold it together. I couldn't get it out, let it go. I couldn't.
Christopher Lloyd also did an amazing job at making you believe he was sharing the screen with cartoon characters, but his performance was a little different. He was playing a toon disguised as a human, and he really brings menace to his character with his own animated features, and I mean his actual facial expressions, which make you uneasy about his character, who is clearly a bad guy right from the start. And when his identity is revealed and he goes all out, he actually is quite scary in this movie. And if you watch this movie for the first time, after you found out that Christopher Lloyd is actually a toon, upon second viewing you actually see little mannerisms in his performance that suggest that he is a toon, even though you would probably never guess it the first time watching it, though he is clearly a bad guy. Now, like I said before, they did use rubber props of the actual cartoon characters to help the actors out, but they were taken away once the real filming came in. But there were also props that were used in the final shot that stayed in the movie. For example, in some scenes you can see that the Weasel characters were actually holding real life guns, and you might wonder, how was this achieved? Well, they actually achieved this by dangling the guns from over the set on wires, and then the Weasel's hands were simply drawn in over the gun to make it look like they were holding them, and it was really effective. And there was a similar technique used in the scene in the club where we first introduced to Jessica Rabbit. The penguin waiters in that scene are actually carrying real trays with real drinks on them. And this was achieved by having the actual metal trays attached to metal rods, and they were moved around from under the set, and the penguins were once again simply drawn in to cover the metal rods to make it look like they were holding the tray up. And then there's a scene where Roger takes a drink in R.K. Maroon's office, and the glass and the drink is actually real, and it's being held by a small robotic arm, which was once again covered up by the animation process perfectly. So another robotic arm that was used in a different scene where Roger is smashing the plates over his head whilst he's singing and dancing in the bar, and once again this was covered up by the animation process. The inclusion of real life objects being handled by the toons all made it more believable that the toons were actually sharing this world with humans, and it worked beautifully. Robert Zemeckis worked closely with the animators, describing his vision and exactly what the toons should be doing in the scene when animated. But another thing that made it believable was the animation itself. The animators really did have the work cut out for them. You see, they had to hand draw over every single frame in the movie in a scene involving a toon. That's 24 frames per second, which means 24 drawings per second, catching every single movement and emotion. In total, there were 82,000 animation cells drawn for the movie, and each had to be painted to perfection. But remember, this was not computer animation, this was all drawn by hand, which meant they didn't have that 3D element to the characters. So when the animation process was finished, the film was then sent to Industrial Lights and Magic, the home of Star Wars, and certain effects were added, mainly shadows and shading to the characters, making them feel like they would fit more in the real world, making these 2D hand-drawn cartoon characters slightly more three-dimensional. And in my opinion, this worked perfectly. For example, the scene where we are first introduced to Jessica Rabbit shows this off brilliantly, due to the set being dimly lit with all those table lamps and spotlights, which cast all these different kinds of shadows and shades on Jessica Rabbit, which gives her that three-dimensional look that makes her look like she's actually there in the scene with the live action actors. It really was revolutionary. And I've got to say, if the animation had not been given those special shading effects and the way that the light bounces off Jessica Rabbit's dress, giving us all those sparkles, the scene just would not have worked. And it's safe to say that this scene is one of the most memorable scenes in the whole movie, and it most definitely did leave an impression on most of us. And whilst we're talking about the animation, let's talk about the cameos in this movie, and man, there are so many. First of all, it's a Disney movie, and there are a lot of Disney toons. But there are also characters from Warner Brothers who also make an appearance in this movie. And this was something that would not have been possible without the help of Steven Spielberg, who got permission from Warner Brothers to use their characters, resulting in a movie that made it possible for Donald Duck and Daffy Duck to go head to head in a piano battle. And of course we got Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny sharing a scene with Bob Hoskins where he came off not too well. And having Disney cartoon characters and Warner Brother characters in the same movie was something that was unheard of and has never happened since. But having so many different cartoon characters mixed in from so many different properties worked wonders for the movie. This created a world where not only Disney toons or Warner Brothers toons existed, but many others as well, making this world where toons exist more believable, making a world where all these toons from different studios all hang out. and it was kind of a big deal at the time. But even with all the beautiful animation, special effects and so many cameos from our favourite toons, this movie simply would not have worked without a good story and a good cast, and this movie had both. For example, from the very first time we meet Eddie Valiant, we learn that he does not like toons, with one perfectly delivered line.
But come on now!
Toons.
That line and the way he delivers it tells us so much. Although we don't know at this point why he hates toons, we definitely do know that he hates toons. Then a little later we get another scene with Eddie sat at his desk at night and he pours a drink. And then the camera sweeps around the table, showing us the opposite side, which belonged to his brother, who was killed by a toon, untouched and covered in dust. And we see various items that all tell a story with not one bit of dialogue. We learn that Eddie and his brother worked together going into business in 1938. We also learn that they solved cases together, including a kidnapping case of Huey, Louie and Dewey, Donald Duck's nephews. They also cleared Goofy of spy charges, and they also worked for the LAPD at some point. And we see that they once had a life in the circus alongside their father. In that one shot, we get an insight into Eddie and his brother's life, the happy times and the darker times. And another thing you don't notice is whilst the camera is swooping around that desk, in the background, the crew members are making changes to the set off camera in real time, changing the set, and they manage not to disturb the shot. When the camera pulls out, it's morning and the sun is up, and we see that Eddie has downed the entire bottle of booze and he is asleep on the desk. All of this was achieved in one single shot, and I think it's got to be one of my favourite shots ever. It's perfect. Of course, after this movie was released, it became a massive hit, but the strange thing is, even though this movie is so iconic and so beloved, it never had a sequel. I mean, sure, there were 3 other short Roger Rabbit cartoons which were produced and played in cinemas before certain movies, but these were all animation. They were Roger Rabbit cartoons very much like the one that opened the movie, and it was good. They were good, but there was no live action characters in those, and they were very short, and you can't class them as sequels. They're more like standalone little cartoons. You can actually find these on the special features of the Blu-ray and the DVD as well, and they're quite enjoyable for what they are. But even though a sequel was considered, it never actually happened, which was a shame, but in many ways makes Who Framed Roger Rabbit all that more special. It truly is one of a kind, and although we have had many other movies that followed, that tried to capture the magic such as Space Jam and Looney Tunes Back in Action, although they're not bad movies, they simply don't compare. Roger Rabbit was a movie that brought together so many different cartoon characters from so many different properties, and it's something that we will probably never see again. It truly is a one-of-a-kind movie that delivers on everything that makes a good movie, as well as the addition of some beautiful animation and some brand new original characters that have now found a deserved place in pop culture. If you liked today's episode, please consider leaving me a like and a comment. It would really do the channel wonders. And I don't know about you, but talking about Roger Rabbit has got me in the mood for watching the movie again. So I'm going to go away and do that. And until next time, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
That's all, folks.